You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lorditis. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. Great to have you riding with me this week, where my friend Scott Horton is back on the show. He might be the most frequently occurring or reoccurring guest. I'd have to go back and count. I don't know, but he's been on here many times, and most of you guys know who he is. If you don't, I think you'll be quite impressed with his deep knowledge of all things foreign policy. Whenever I have questions or want to do a topic surrounding the foreign policy world, Scott's my go-to guy, and he's a lot of people's go-to guy because, quite frankly, he knows more about it than most people on the planet. We'll put it that way. You will see that as we dive into this discussion, and it's a discussion on something that the corporate press really steers away from. You know, obviously, we've got this conflict going on in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine, and that's really all over the news. Every channel, all hours, they discuss this, and yet they avoid this one uncomfortable topic. We're told that we're supposed to be supporting the Ukrainian military. In fact, really, we're supporting them whether we want to or not, because billions of tax dollars have gone directly to the Ukrainian military. And there's this uncomfortable topic of who is this Azov Battalion group? You know the name? They're fighting with the Ukrainian military, and they're Nazis. They are Nazi soldiers. I know that's an uncomfortable thing to discuss, but it is what it is, so we're going to discuss it here on this episode. No, I don't mean Nazis like someone a progressive doesn't like, so they call them that, knowing that that's just kind of a derogatory term. I'm talking about swastika-wearing actual Ukrainian Nazi soldiers in the Azov Battalion. Who are they? What's the history? Why is the mainstream corporate press avoiding the topic? And we get into it. It was brought up by someone on Fox News to President Zelensky, and yet then it was quickly removed from the tape because we're not supposed to know about this group of Nazis in the Azov Battalion. But I'm here to educate you and at least to guide you along as Scott educates me and all of us out there listening. So let's bring him in. You guys know who he is. He's the director of the Libertarian Institute. He's the editorial director of antiwar.com. He's the host of the Scott Horton Show and Anti-War Radio, where this is important to me, and it's impressive. More than 5,500 interviews since 2003. That's incredible. Author of the 2017 book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Editor of the 2019 book, The Great Ron Paul, The Scott Horton Interviews. Author of the 2021 book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. He's back with us once again. Scott Horton, welcome back to the show. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to have you back. It's been a while, but I will say since I've seen you in person last, now I see you on I guess, can we call it mainstream cable news more often than I used to? So that's a good thing, I think. I see you on Kennedy fairly often, it seems like.
Yeah, and I did one good hour on OAN, which is sort of the Trumpian kind of conservative cable thing. And I guess the host and her producer had seen my speech about the background to the Ukraine thing. And so it was their idea too. I didn't force this on them or anything. They said, what we should do is we'll just do one segment on each president. We'll do like Bush, Clinton, and then we'll do another segment on W. Bush, and then on Obama, and then on Trump, and then on Biden. And we'll just knock it out for an hour. And I'm like, hell yes, sign me up. Let's do it.
I watched
it was great. She just set me up. She'd ask me one question and let me go for 10 minutes, and we'd go to commercial, and like it just worked great.
Yes.
That was good. And then, Kennedy, I guess Dave Smith told him, you ought to talk to my guy, and gave him my email address like last October, something like that, last September or October. And then I've been on every week or two since then. They have me back all the time now. So that's been a lot, pretty fun.
Yeah. I love seeing good people get more fame. I guess that's a weird way to say it. More publicity or something like that. But anyway,
it's like, hey man, state your case. You got 4 minutes, Horton. Go.
Yeah. It's like, how do you give you
like
4 minutes?
Ultimate sounds for me.
Right.
Yeah. I just took 4 minutes explaining that to you. Are you kidding me? You know what I mean? That was all right, time's up. Drive home.
Yeah, exactly. For people listening and watching, as far as I know, I'm not sure that you're the guy that I emailed to get you on. He probably didn't even tell you what we're going to talk about. I will tell people listening, right before we recorded, I said, do you have any questions about any of this? And he said, no, I'm good to go. And for those listening, Scott is always a depth of knowledge, and I don't have to prep him. It's so nice. It's a great change.
And if I don't know the answer, I won't pretend to. I'll just tell you, I don't know. And then we'll go on to something else.
You should be a politician then. It'd be a refreshing, honest one.
Can you imagine? My God.
I have imagined, yes. I was out with a friend the other night, and it's a friend who keeps up with things fairly often. And we were talking about Russia and Ukraine, and he said, man, I was talking to this guy, and the guy told me there's actually Nazis in Ukraine. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? And I said, well, no, it's not crazy. Of course there are. And it hit me because this guy is a guy that kind of reads and pays attention to some things. It hit me like maybe sometimes I'm in this bubble where even people that pay attention don't know some of these things. And I thought, well, let me do a little bit of an episode explaining who some of these Nazi types are in Ukraine. And obviously I know that you know everything when it comes to foreign policy. So let's talk. I want to talk about the Azov Battalion and what their role is and how pivotal they are, if at all, in Ukraine. But first, who are they and how did this come about?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I'll preface by saying this is one of Putin's excuses for invading, is I got to go denazify this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not making the case that is legitimate. I mean, yeah, there are Nazis in the country, but it doesn't mean you just launch a war. And they're probably the most dangerous Nazis in Europe or anywhere in the world as far as an organized armed force of Nazis. That much is true. But to me, it's sort of just like with the Al-Qaeda guys in Syria. I'm not saying we should invade Syria to attack the Al-Qaeda guys. I'm just saying, how in the world are we backing these Al-Qaeda guys when that's who they are? And you can't tell me Assad is worse because he's not. It's sort of the same thing here where I'm not saying the government of Ukraine is a Nazi regime. And I'm not saying that Russia's invasion in the name of denazification is justified. But what I am saying is certainly there's enough of a presence of these guys inside the Ukrainian armed forces and inside their so-called civilian government, I guess their puppet government, that we sure as hell should not have anything to do with them whatsoever. And the consequences of arming them up now are surely going to be terrible. So that's all I'm saying as far as that. Because I know how, especially in this day and age, probably more than any other time in my life, anything you say, people immediately race to try to jump to conclusion to say, oh, I get it. You're coming from this angle. And what you really mean is this, because what you really want me to think is that, because you're taking the same position as this other guy. And it's this whole extrapolated thing out far beyond what you actually said. So I'm just trying to make myself clear here that I'm not saying Putin was right to justify it. And I'm not saying that it's a Nazi junta that rules Ukraine. If that was true, hell, it might be an excuse to invade. I don't know. But it's not the case. But I am saying, boy, there are enough of these guys that we shouldn't have anything to do with intervening on their side. So now you ask me who they are. They're the proud grandsons of the Nazis from World War II is who they are. And it's, essentially the major parties, the Svoboda Party and Right Sector and Azov all are essentially, not even essentially, they are literally direct descendants of the groups that were the OUN, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, who were pro-German Nazi and who, their leadership and, their armed force fought on the side of the Nazis in Western Ukraine during World War II and participated in perpetrating the Holocaust against Jews and against Poles and Russian, ethnic Russians as well, but especially Jews and Poles there, killed tens of thousands of them. And, one of their major leaders at the time, the guy who was supposed to be the dictator of their state, if he had gotten his way, is a guy named Stepan Bendera. And you'll see, kind of posters and flags of him all the time among the Ukrainian nationalists. It was his men who had, committed absolute atrocities. Again, tens of thousands of Jewish and Polish civilians eradicated by them, operating under Nazi authority as what they called the Galatian SS, where Galatia is sort of this region in Western Ukraine. And so then in the Cold War, the CIA backed them in different factions of them. And I was actually just reading a thing yesterday about how they did not back Bendera's faction because they didn't think he commanded enough loyalty anymore. And they switched to his competitor, a guy named Lebed, who was a leader of a different faction of the OUN. And, I'm working on a book about this now, and I'll have all footnotes to death for you. And Buck, later, if you want, I can send you an email full of links to crazy stuff to read if you want to look deeper into all this stuff. The whole history behind this. But, in the Cold War, the CIA backed them. And in fact, there was a recent article in the LA Times that says, we've backed extreme right-wing forces in Ukraine before and it didn't work out that well. Let's take a look at this history. And he quotes from a now declassified but previously secret CIA history of their own intervention and program there in around the 1950s. And some of this intervention lasted throughout the Cold War. But just during this part of the secret war in the 1950s, they said, we were knowingly sending these men to their deaths. We knew they couldn't defeat the Soviet Union. What the hell were they going to do? All we were doing was we were using them to bleed Russia. And when we're going to do an operation like this, we're knowingly sending men to their deaths in this way. We got to think real carefully about what we're doing here. Even CIA guys got to have a conscience at some point. But of course, what they're talking about is sending a bunch of Nazis to their deaths, fighting against the commies in this insurgency, which the KGB, pretty quickly rolled up. But that's who the CIA has a lot of sympathy for, God, geez, we're using and abusing these loyal Nazi cadres of ours. In fact, you may have read, people may know this. The author's name is right on the tip of my tongue. I'm going to think of it. The article is called The Secret Treaty of Fort Hunt. It's from Covert Action Quarterly from 1995 or something. I used to have a hard copy of it. But you can find it. The Secret Treaty of Fort Hunt. It's by Carl Oglesby. I'm pretty sure Oglesby is the guy that wrote it. And it's about this guy, Reinhard Gehlen, who worked for Hitler and was a Nazi intelligence officer in the war. And then the CIA inherited him and put him in charge of intelligence in West Germany. And he was, in charge of running a bunch of operations behind the Iron Curtain. I don't think many of which were very successful. But he ended up, Reinhard Gehlen, the Nazi, in West German intelligence, ended up being Stepan Bandera's keeper for a while until the KGB assassinated him in, I think it was 58, with some cyanide. I'm pretty sure it was 59 when they kill him. But anyway, so now, fast forward a little bit of the ways to the fall of the Soviet Union. And President H.W. Bush goes to Kiev, Ukraine, in August of 1991. Now, as we know now in hindsight, the Soviet Union's days were numbered in the double digits at that point. I mean, it was, or maybe barely into the triple digits, but it was December. It was Christmas Day, 1991, that the red flag came down and the red, white, and blue flag went up, and all of the last of the Soviet republics were set free, and the entire thing was gone. And it was just Russia, and no more Russian Empire, no more Soviet Empire anymore. Well, but just a few months before, in August, H.W. Bush, and this is embarrassing, but it's still instructive, and you can, learn from it kind of thing. H.W. Bush, Buck, tried to save the Soviet Union. He and James Baker and Brent Scowcroft wanted the USSR to stay together, not as a commie totalitarian empire, but as a federation ruled by Moscow. And that included, I guess, I had this mistaken before. I'm not exactly sure why it was a special case that they wanted the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia set free. But they wanted all of the rest of the so-called republics, which I guess would have included all the Central Asian stands, but especially Belarus and Ukraine, that, and then I guess even including Azerbaijan and Armenia, Georgia, and all the Caucasus region and on into Central Asia. And so Bush went to Kiev and he gave this speech that William Safire, the hawk from the New York Times, dubbed the Chicken Kiev speech. You can go read it online. And the reason he called it that was because this is Bush not wanting to take full advantage and destroy the USSR. And ironically, him taking such a soft stand helped the USSR to dissolve, right? If he'd been too pushy, he might have helped hold the thing together, which is what he was actually wanting. So the whole thing was kind of ironical. But anyway, he says to them, and this speech was written by Condoleezza Rice, by the way. And Bush Sr., he says to them, he goes, listen, freedom is important. Freedom is the American way. Freedom is what it's all about. What you guys need is freedom. However, independence is not the same thing as freedom. And America does not stand with any move for independence on your part. And if you're ever going to achieve independence, it's going to be on Moscow's timetable. Gorbachev knows what he's doing. I stand with Gorbachev. You should pipe down and keep quiet and not make trouble. And you sure as hell should not make the mistaken impression that I'm going to come and save you if you get into trouble with Moscow as this thing is unwinding here. And then he says, we will not support an effort to replace a far-off tyranny with a local despotism. And he warns them against the severe consequences of suicidal ethnic hatreds. Right? So this is Bush is reading them the riot act. Like, I do not have your back. Roger, I'm not going to help you. You are in Russia's near abroad, not mine. You're too far away, and I'm suspicious of you people anyway. Now, obviously, this is the former director of the CIA that we're talking about here. If any American president knew the history of the Stay Behind program and backing right-wing forces against the commies in Europe, it would have been him. So he very well may have had like a real education in that and a real reason for saying that, because it was true that, as John Kerry, as Joe Biden said at Harvard University about Syria, he goes, look, it's not like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison are about to pop up behind some sand dune and take over and make the place this limited republic or whatever, right? That's the same thing here. You're not going to have Thomas Jefferson and James Madison pop out of a sunflower field and come and say, this is how to have a limited republic in Ukraine with common respect for all dignity and individual liberty and whatever. Like, that's just not how it is. It's all faction versus faction. And importantly, we have Republicans and Democrats in America who call each other commie and Nazi all day. But over there, they really mean it. And over there, you have the bloodiest history in the world where Stalin, of course, as libertarians and right-wingers are familiar, left-wingers are only just learning about this now that it's good propaganda against Russia, is the Holodomor, which was its own Holocaust. 3 million people killed, essentially when Stalin just stole all their grain so he could feed all of the people back in Russia that he was forcing off of their farms and into the factories. Somebody's got to feed them if they're not allowed to grow their own food anymore. So to steal all the grain from the Ukrainians. This is in the 1930s. Killed 3.5 million of them or something. Starved to death in a deliberately inflicted famine, right? Then the Nazis come to liberate you from the commies. Great. And then they come and institute the Holocaust and help, millions of Ukrainians died in the war. Hundreds of thousands of civilians just lined up and shot in the world's greatest nightmare. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you can't really imagine. Unless you really immerse yourself in the history, there's just no way to think about this happening in your town where tens of thousands of people are just lined up and shot and murdered and thrown in the river or whatever. I mean, this is just, and this went on for years during the war there. And then guess what? The commies won, pushed the Nazis right back out again, and held the whole place in this totalitarian nightmare until the year 1991, up until that moment. So you talk about bad blood, there's a lot of it. In fact, a big part of the reason that there's so many ethnic Russians in the east of the country is because Stalin had moved a bunch of Ukrainians out and moved a bunch of Russians in. Because he had the power to do stuff like that. Massive, ethnic reorganizations and things. So not that that's the fault of any ethnic Russians in the east of the country now, but I'm just saying it's the unfortunate fact of history that they're all kind of, living through the aftermath of. And then, as Henry Kissinger wrote in 2014, this country at that time was only 23 years old, right? Now it's way 8 years older than that. But it's before it was occupied and ruled by the USSR, it was ruled by the Russian Empire. And before that, it was ruled by the Polish Empire and the Lithuanian Empire and the whoever. It was never a sovereign nation state. As Putin complained in his declaration of war, he blamed the commies. He said Lenin and Stalin drew these borders and incomprehensibly included the Donbass in Ukraine in the first place. Of course, we know why. For the same reason that the British would have done that, right? If we can't divide you and conquer you, we'll group you together with people who you're different from and conquer you that way. Keep you divided by adding more territory to you, drawing the line around you bigger kind of thing. So this will be a way for ethnic Russians to have dominance over ethnic Ukrainians in that space, right? That makes sense for why Lenin and Stalin would do that. And then as Putin complained, it was Khrushchev who gave Crimea to Ukraine, even though it had belonged to Russia since Catherine the Great in the 1780s. And he did that for domestic political reasons. But of course, it created much controversy and ended up leading to war there. Certainly a very controversial re-seizure of the Crimean Peninsula by Russia in 2014. And then he complained that Gorbachev, he shared H.W. Bush's complaint that Gorbachev had let every last republic go free, including the Baltics, which have huge Russian minorities in them, and including Belarus and Ukraine. And as he goes on and on about Ukraine, hell, we tried independence. I mean, he got there late, right? He got there 10 years later. It was already a done deal. We tried to let there be an independent Ukraine, but it turns out, as he put it, I'm paraphrasing him roughly, there's no such thing as an independent Ukraine. If you let Ukraine be independent, the Americans will steal it and will run off with it. And look at it now. It's an American colony with an American puppet president, which is exactly what Justin Romano would have called him, a sock puppet, right? That's exactly what he is. It's a sock puppet of Kolomoisky, his benefactor, oligarch, warlord, and the Americans and their other allies behind him. And so that much is true. And I'm only saying so because it's true. Again, I'm not making the case for Russian violence here, but I'm just saying that much of his argument is just, it's rational, as far as what the problem is there. Now, then very briefly, the massive project since the end of the Cold War has been NATO expansion further and further into Eastern Europe. And this has included the project of the color-coded revolutions as sort of an adjunct under Clinton, Bush, and into Obama of these repeated coups d'etats against friends of Russia in their near abroad, in Serbia, in Georgia. Not all of these are successful, but still Albania, Armenia, Serbia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Lebanon, Ukraine. Obviously, they tried in Belarus in 2005 as well. Now, in 2004, they succeeded in stopping Yanukovych, the president, Viktor Yanukovych, from becoming president. He won the election, but they essentially, with the Orange Revolution, they canceled the election, reran it, and the Western guy won. Well, the same guy they didn't want to win in 2004 won again in 2010 and became the president. And they couldn't really do anything about that. It was a free and fair election, according to the Europeans. But I don't know, Buck, if this was an offer you can't possibly accept or whether they thought they could push their luck and he would go along. Either way, right? They either set him up or they, in effect, set him up. But what they did was they were going to have him sign a trade deal with the European Union. And then they changed the terms at the last minute. And he was going to have to raise taxes. He was going to have to take out a huge loan from the IMF. And he was going to have to do all these austerity measures, cut pension rates and raise pension ages for the elderly and all of these kinds of things. And then on the end, he wasn't allowed to have a like trade deal with the Russians. If he was going to have a deal with the EU, it had to be exclusive. Meanwhile, Putin is like, well, hell, I'll give you 15 billion. I guess it was a loan, but it was going to be, much more reasonable rates and without any of these strings attached to it. And I don't care if you have a deal with the EU. You can still have a trade deal with us, And Yanukovych said, geez, I feel like a bride who showed up at my wedding to be greeted with a prenuptial agreement. And now I'm not really in the mood anymore. I'm not so sure I even want to marry you at all. How do you like that? And then he went home. And that became the impetus for the protest movement and eventually riots in what was called the Maidan, which is the big town square there in Kiev. And then all through November, December, January, and into February, somebody, i.e. you, was paying millions of dollars for these people to stay out there, to stay fed, to stay warm, to stay entertained, to keep the porta potties clean and all these things, and to have rock shows and all this stuff, and including the Americans showed up. Chris Murphy, John McCain, and Victoria Nuland went and gave out cookies and sandwiches in the town square and all that, and urged the people to revolt. And we have Nuland on tape. She was the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, and she's intercepted on the phone with Jeffrey Pyatt, and they're plotting the coup. They're choosing who's going to be in the new government and who they don't want to see in it yet. And they're talking about how Nuland says, I just got off the phone with Jake Sullivan, and he says the Vice President Biden is willing. We're going to get him on the phone on a conference call to give the proper attaboys and to make the deets stick with all the people that were doing to put this thing together. And that included forcing Yanukovych to sign a deal that he would call for early elections and he would pull his police back from the town square. Well, the rioters, led by the Nazis, the right sector and the Svoboda Party, they didn't respect their side of the deal at all. They just seized the buildings when the cops were pulled back. They just seized the buildings and did the coup. And in fact, that deal was reached because Yanukovych was put under all this pressure because of some professional snipers who were brought in almost certainly, like 98, 99% certainty, were brought in by the right sector Nazis to do a false flag attack and start sniping random people in the square to bring the whole thing to a fever pitch in the square and in terms of international diplomacy and politics too. That this thing has gone so far. Oh my God, he's slaughtering his own people now. You have to sign this deal or else. And in fact, one of the European ministers, I need to find this. One of the European ministers threatened Yanukovych. Note to self here, I don't think this is in the book. Threatened Yanukovych to sign the deal, which he did. And then that was it. It was just a coup. It was a street putsch and they ran him out of power. I think they even threatened, like, your life is on the line here, pal. You better sign it. Something like that. And it was caught on video. It was the kind of thing where, like, they were in the hallway and they were overheard saying it, that kind of thing. I need to find that. But anyway, so that was, the big start of it, right? There was, as far as them coming to the attention, they didn't seem to play a major role in the coup of 2004. And there were, people who knew that this is a problem lurking in the background here. Mm-hmm. But during the Maidan protests, it was like, hey, who are these guys, man, with all this crazy Nazi symbology and who are clearly, dangerous. They're not peaceful protesters. They're not moderate rebels. I mean, these guys are trouble. You could tell just by looking at them, And then, so what happened was, very briefly, they threatened to kick the Russians out of their naval base in Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. So Putin seized it. He had his Marines and sailors go outside and seize the peninsula in what's called a coup de main. It wasn't even a war. They just took the thing over, essentially, virtually without a fight at all. Very, very few people were killed. I think the highest number I ever saw was 6 that were killed in the thing, and maybe not even that much. But then a war broke out in the east of the country, because in the east of the country, they refused to accept the authority of the new coup d'etat junta. They said, you guys can seize a bunch of government buildings and take over the country. Well, we can certainly seize government buildings and just refuse to respect your authority. And so that was what they did. And then immediately, the new coup regime declared a war on terrorism and invaded the east of the country. And it's just an absolute catastrophe. I mean, they killed like 10,000 people in the space of about a year and a half or two. And then very much so, during this whole time, the front line kind of vanguard of the Ukrainian armed forces were these Nazis, these committed white supremacists. And it's, right sector, Azov, Adar, and a group called C14, which that's the famous 14 words of the white supremacist slogan and all that. That's what that means. And it is, it's funny, they're National Socialists, but there is like a National Socialist International, you know what I mean? Just like the commies, where these guys are kind of, are blood brothers from across Europe and even the United States. You've had Nazis go there to fight with them against the Russians. Again, this war we're talking about now has been going on for 8 years, since 2014. So you've had even, at Charlottesville, one of the Nazis who was arrested for that, not for running over the lady, but who was involved in that and charged with felonies, had been to Ukraine, where he fought on the side of the Nazis against the Russians in the Donbass. There were also stories in The Intercept, of all places, which never really covered Ukraine properly because Omidyar was involved in it, their owner. And they never really covered Syria properly either. Only Murtaza, Al-Qaeda, Hussein, who, spinning for the bad guys, ever covered it at The Intercept. I don't know why exactly. But anyway, for some reason, they had, I think, 3 or 4 really great articles about Syrian jihadists from Obama's dirty war in Syria going off to Ukraine to join up with the Nazis to fight against the Russians. Because, of course, you have the Bin Ladenites had their bloody war in Chechnya against the Russians in 94 and again in 98, 99, 2000, the latter time of which Bill Clinton, the CIA, and the Saudis were backing the Chechen terrorists against the Russians, which, by the way, made it into Putin's declaration of war back at the end of February, was he said, yeah, and you backed the terrorists against us in Chechnya, and you think we forgot about that? And by the way, who is he? He's the guy that Yeltsin hired to win that war and then named president right out and resigned on New Year's and handed the whole thing over to him. That's where Putin comes from, is blowback from Bill Clinton's policy of backing the terrorists there. So you have these Chechen terrorists who went to Syria to fight in the dirty war, and then now they got an opportunity to kill Russians again. So they go to Ukraine to line up with the Nazis. And so you have tens of thousands of these guys. And now, this is another thing. Bret Baier, the most important hard news reporter at Fox News, he did an interview with Vladimir Zelensky. And he asked him about the Azov Battalion. And I heard they're Nazis. And I swear to God, Buck, they cut this out of the YouTube and the Fox archive. You got to find it on Rumble. Some guy posted it from his DVR. The official version, they cut this out of the interview, which, man, it's the most Orwellian thing. You can't do that. How can you do that? It's just, you know what I mean? It's just straight out of the memory. And, Carl Cameron's series, it happens. It's still incredible. I can't get desensitized to it when they do that. But what happened was Bret Baier says to Zelensky, he goes, listen, we keep hearing all about this Azov Battalion, that they're a bunch of Nazis. What the hell is up with that? And Zelensky says, hey, they are what they are. What? And then he goes, look, hey, they're helping defend Ukraine. And, I'll tell you what, you'll be happy to know that our military has integrated them into our official armed force here. And when some of them crossed the line back in 2014, they went on trial. And he neglected to say they got all their convictions overturned and went free and are back fighting on the front lines right now. But, you think about what would happen if you had, some massive right-wing militia in America, like a Nazi militia, not just a right-wing militia, but an avowedly white supremacist militia at war, right? More than 10,000 of them. Somewhere taking over a town or a county or doing some kind of thing. When the U.S. Army arrives, do you think they're going to just integrate them into the Army? Or they're going to completely crush them and disarm them and send them to prison or home, at least? But they're not going to say, okay, you know what, Nazis? You guys have a point. We'll let you be our 83rd Airborne Division. That's what? That's inconceivable that could ever happen, right? That's what happened here. Zelensky wants you to know. Don't worry, Buck. What happened was we showed up and we told those Nazis, you guys want a job and better weapons? Because we got some for you. So you don't have to worry about it. Now these Nazis have better weapons and better training, to fight this war. So that's why you should no longer be concerned. That was his answer that they edited out of the Fox News archive of that interview. So, I have seen people say, look, Azov just got completely obliterated in Mariupol. And so you can shut up about Azov now because the Russians just killed them by the thousands. And that may well be true. I don't know if they were really surrounded and pinned down and isolated and killed in that way. But that is one of the stated goals. I guess I said before it was one of Putin's excuses for the war. And that's the worst take on it. It could be. It was one of the reasons for the war. He really was determined to isolate these particular factions and obliterate them, if only to make an example out of them. I tend to lean more toward the excuse. I don't think he was really that worried about them overall. But, one thing I didn't mention was that after the coup of 2014, a lot of these guys got very powerful positions in the government. Defense minister and head of the police in the capital city. And, Andrei Parubi was the Speaker of the Parliament for years. He was the leader of the right sector, of the Svoboda Party, which used to be called the Social Nationalist Party. Like the National Socialists, they're just the Social Nationalists, that's all. And they have swastikas. And their leader, Tannibok, if you put Oleg Tannibok in Google Images, well, the first thing, if you put it in videos, you'll get Victoria Nuland talking about, he works for us. But if you put it in Google Images, you'll see, one, there he is palling around with John McCain. And two, there he is with the Hitler salute and the SS lightning bolts behind him. I mean, that's who these guys are. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, frankly, I know I should have said this at the beginning, Buck. We live in a society now where anybody to the right of Karl Marx is called a fascist or something like that. Right. I mean, I'm not abusing the term here. These guys are not. In fact, there was a communist or a very leftist, I don't know exactly what sect he's a part of, but a very leftist anti-war guy named Richard Medhurst said, oh yeah, the Azov Battalion are far right, like the suicide bombers in Syria are moderate rebels. In other words, so here's a guy who's a leftist who is saying far right is a euphemism for far all the way to the right until you actually grow out the little Hitler mustache. Like that's as far as you get, where you're actually a concentration camp guard. That's as far to the right as you can go. That's who these guys are. And look, they're the only organized armed force of Nazis anywhere in the world right now. And they're on America's side. And sorry, one more rant. I'm almost done. In the battle days, America allied with Joe Stalin, the same guy who'd already done the Holodomor, right? Allied with Stalin, the worst commie dictator ever until Mao came, in order to destroy Nazism in Germany. Now, we're willing to ally with a Nazi allied infested government and armed force to fight against the Russians when they're not even the commies anymore at all. They're the red, white, and blue, essentially corrupt, conservative, capitalist, Christian mirror image of the United States of America, or what we were 10 years ago, So it's just incomprehensible that we would do this. Republican Russia, in the worst sense of that term.
Yeah.
Fine. It's such a threat, we got to back the National Socialists against them? In what world? And how can it be that this is Robert Kagan's wife's policy? How come nobody ever, confronts these guys about hey, man. I mean, in fact, if you read the Israeli press, they're very critical about this. What are we doing? But they don't ever call out the American Zionists who were leading this parade. And what do they have at stake in Ukraine? What is it? And never even mind Ukraine. What is it that they hate so much about Russia that they're willing to get in bed with a bunch of literal Hitler-loving Nazis, literal grandsons of those who actually served Hitler in the Holocaust, to do this? And you can read in the Israeli press where they're like, what in the hell is this policy? But again, they never call out Victoria Nuland. You oppose a policy like this, they'll call you a capo. But, introduce one. you get a free pass. Not sure the mathematics there, but.
I love when these really cool companies offer to sponsor my show, and that's exactly what has happened with the Gold River Trading Company. It's only the best tea I've ever had in my life. The names alone will probably sell you guys on them. They've got the whole leaf 1776 American breakfast black tea. Then is my favorite, the gunpowder green tea, peach and apricot flavored, if you will. They've got peppermint green tea. Check this out. If you're stressed out in the evening and trying to mellow out, maybe even one of my episodes has raised your stress level, Gold River Trading Company has the chamomile herbal tea that's spearmint and lavender flavor, so you can kind of mellow out in the evenings. Give it a shot. Personally, I'm trying to quit drinking energy drinks in the afternoon, and now I've switched over to the gunpowder green tea for the pick-me-up. I can actually pronounce what's in this. It's tea instead of all those crazy ingredients in my energy drinks. So, since they are sponsoring this show, I've got you a promo code. It's BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout. That will get you 10% off of your order. If you don't love tea, they've also got cocoa, so check that out as well. That's at goldriverco.com. It's for Gold River Trading Company, goldriverco.com. Promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, will get you 10% off of your order. Reward these guys for reaching out and sponsoring shows like mine. Thank you guys. Let's get back to the show. Why do certain people have such a thing against Russia as to back the faction that we're talking about?
Man, I don't know. On one hand, for the arms manufacturers, they just make a rich target. And you want to get rid of battleships and submarines and aircraft carriers and long-range bombers and these huge big-ticket items. The Ayatollahs, not much of a target, really, compared to Russia and China. So you can think of the terror wars as sort of a temporary stand-in for the Cold War. Now they're able to get back to Cold War again. That's why they call it a self-licking ice cream cone. You can be a conspiracist about it and say, yeah, no, it was a deliberate policy for the last 20 years to push Russia and China together at our expense because that's what they wanted. I don't really think that's really true. I just think they suck at everything, including handling all the major powers in the world and their approach to them all. But they got to a point, at least, where they provoked the Chinese enough into building up their naval force enough that it's something to point at and pretend to be afraid of. And they provoked the Russians enough that, Putin laid down the law in Ukraine again, beginning 8 years ago, that this far and no further. And so they make great enemies to have. Now, it's also true that, it sounds kind of childish, but I think that probably is right. That they just refuse to admit their role in any of this. You know what I mean? They can't say, I'm repeating myself, sorry to audiences who've seen me do other interviews. When they're drinking at night in the room and it's just 2 or 3 of them, you might like for Biden and Sullivan and Blinken and Nuland to be able to say, like, hey guys, we kind of really screwed up when we did that coup in 2014. And we could have let Yanukovych just finish out his term and try to get next time. We're spreading democracy and all that, right? Maybe because this is a little bit our fault, we need to have a little bit of allowance for the Russian reaction and deal with it on, we don't have to take their side of the story, but we can at least accept that there's something for them to be upset about here, I just don't think they're that honest ever. And I just don't think that you can get anybody inside the beltway, as they say, to just admit that they suck at running a world empire. And this is at least a little bit their fault. And so instead, they have to explain it away. And how they explain it away is that Putin is evil. Putin is aggressive. Putin is the czar, if not Joe Stalin. And he's coming back. He wants to conquer all the land back to the Elbe River and maybe all the way to Portugal if he can. Who's going to ever stop him? I saw a funny headline in the Daily Mail. They had a quote from somebody in the Russian government saying, we want a common European home from, the Ural Mountains all the way to Lisbon. And in other words, he was saying they want like a European army, if not NATO, they want like a European army and for them to be a part of it too. like in alliance with everybody else, like just so that we don't fight. We're all like in this military superstructure, federal type thing. And then the headline was, the Russians threatened to conquer all of Europe, all the way to Lisbon. All, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not what he was saying at all. But it's just better to put it that way. And, you know, like, frankly, too, it's the same thing with North Korea and the same thing with Cuba, right? That you're just not allowed to be independent from the American empire at all. You're not allowed to tell Uncle Sam no. Hell, you and I know this domestically. I mean, look, we just marked the anniversary of the Davidian massacre the other day, as Bill Hicks said about the Waco massacre back in 1993. So that's the whole point of that, is to remind you that state power will always win. They'll bust your door down. That's why they show you cops on TV all the time, just like with Waco, to just let you know you are overmatched here. And they will get your ass, and they will remember. They will take your name and they will keep it. And your day will come. That kind of thing. Look at Cuba. We've had Cuba under blockade since 1959. And a lot of that is, you know, the politics of Floridian electoral college votes and that kind of thing. But a lot of it, too, is just the U.S. State Department and just the imperial attitude from New York to D.C. that you're just not allowed to tell America no ever. North Korea is another great example where we could have killed them with kindness, absolutely out of tyranny and communism 25, 30 years ago. Bill Clinton, all he had to do was just treat them with a little bit of respect. And in fact, he did. Bill Clinton had something like a decent deal going with the North Koreans until W. Bush came in and ruined it. And essentially, long and the short of it is, forced them out of the nuclear treaty and forced them to go ahead and get nuclear weapons when before they weren't seeking them. And we could have just, you know, there were so many opportunities where we had South Korean leaders who wanted to pursue reconciliation and reunification with the North and to sign a final peace treaty and all that. We had chances under Donald Trump that, of course, he blew, but that the entire American establishment helped him blow too. I mean, I think you remember when he went to Vietnam, to Saigon, to meet with the North Koreans. That day, the Democrats had his lawyer, Michael Cohen, testify him against him in Congress right at the time that he was meeting. And then they had this narrative that Trump is weak and naive and foolish and stupid, and he's going to give away the whole store to Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un is going to walk all over him. Kim Jong-un is going to run circles around him. Kim Jong-un is going to trick and deceive and manipulate our naive, guileless president into just giving away everything. And North Korea will be the great victor, and Donald Trump and America, their victim. And just, God damn, they just laid it on so thick and made it essentially impossible for him to do anything but walk away from that table and say, sorry, no deal. Because they were just going to absolutely crucify him. Now, if he'd been man enough, first of all, he'd been smart enough to not invite John Bolton along to the meeting. Thank you very much. Because, of course, John Bolton, all he did was interrupt and obstruct and try to ruin the thing. But he would have had to be willing to take the hit. He would have been willing to. And look, we're talking about Donald Trump here. If he'd been clever enough, he could have just said, yeah, well, you see how CNN is against it? That's how you know it's virtue, man. These are the worst people in the world. They're the enemies of the public. I keep telling you. Here I sign a peace deal with a nuclear power and they're against it. Yeah, because they worship Satan, right? Like, whatever. Just say that. Kick their ass. But no, he backed down, you know? But that consensus is powerful, man. You know, his own government wanted to do preemptive strikes against North Korea. So I think it's the same kind of principle with China and Russia. You know, the American doctrine since the end of the Cold War and that defense to planning guidance that Libby and Wolfowitz and Khalilzad wrote for Cheney in 92. It says, we'll not allow there to be any near-peer competitor to us. We'll not allow any military power or combination of powers on the planet to even consider building up enough to threaten us. It's a unipolar world, and we're going to structure it such that it stays that way. And so then that means an independent Russia and an independent China are just intolerable. One way or the other, they've got to go. And the Americans, especially in the case of Russia, have just worn this on their sleeve. You know, back in 2013, right before the revolution, Carl Gershman, the head of the NED, wrote in the Washington Post that, look, if Vladimir Putin doesn't like it when we take Ukraine away from him, well, he just might find himself on the receiving end of one of these regime changes inside Moscow itself coming soon next. Here. There was Biden's gaffe. There's been a few, just a few weeks ago where he said, this man cannot remain in power. There have been other cases where they've pretty much shown their hand. Barack Obama, in a speech yesterday, talked about how they had worked to overthrow to meddle in Ukraine. They went over there. He said, I was over there with McFaul and we met with all these dissident groups. And he says, this is at a time where Putin had receded to the background. What does that mean? The all-powerful strongman, autocrat, dictator of Russia had receded to the background? That's right. He had stepped down from the presidency. It was his right-hand man. What's his first name? Medvedev. Pardon me, I'm forgetting his first name. Whatever. Anyway, Medvedev was the president. And Putin went to go cool his heels as prime minister in the Duma for a little while. Now, this is a big deal. And this is a guy who, even as Henry Kissinger said then, he goes, listen, that's not what dictators do. I mean, this guy is essentially, president for life, like Franklin Roosevelt. But he, like Roosevelt, he's not tearing up the whole Constitution, just half of it. You know what I mean? But like he does mean to leave a Republican form of government behind him in sort of, in form. And, as Daryl Cooper was pointing out, if you're really a dictator, or even not a dictator, but even say a pseudo dictator like Putin was, you're a strongman, an autocrat. It doesn't make sense for you to step down. A dictator's narrative is, what would you do without me? You guys would be screwed without me, right? But if you go and step down for a while and let somebody else run the place, well, you're the one raising the question of whether we really need you that bad after all. Apparently, we can run this government without you and we'll be fine, right? So, it seemed like he really was willing to give that a try. And he was going to at least sit out for 2 terms and maybe more. And instead, in fact, I have it here, but watch this. So Obama says, he's talking with McFaul, and he says, and then we were reminiscing and thinking about that moment of possibility and what might have happened to it. Well, we know what happened to it. He had Hillary Clinton lie to Medvedev and tell him, we need you to vote for, or I guess at least abstain on this UN resolution authorizing a no-fly zone over Libya. Because Muammar Gaddafi is about to murder every last man, woman, and child in the city of Benghazi, this ridiculous hoax, if we don't launch this no-fly zone. And we need you to authorize it. And Medvedev, I forget if he voted for it or at least, I think he just abstained. But he could have vetoed it, right? A no vote on the Security Council is a veto, right? Any one member of the UN Security Council can say no and stop anything else. It's not a majority vote thing. It's a minority of one can veto and kill anything of the permanent members. And so they got him to go along with it. And then what they do? They used it as a big bait and switch. And they launched a 9-month-long regime change war that ended up with Gaddafi lynched and murdered on the side of the road. A bayonet up his rear end and a gunshot to the side of the head, right? And so they just made an absolute chump out of Medvedev. And that's what happened to him. And imagine, again, as Blumenthal said in his tweet, can you imagine if the Russians were inviting all the dissident factions in America, the Occupy movement and Tea Party and the guys over at InfoWars and whoever, the libertarians, to everybody come to the Russian embassy and we'll talk about how we're going to give you a bunch of money and encourage you to destabilize America and threaten the stability of the Republican and the Democrat. I mean, just to even say it is, forget it. It's completely crazy, right? Look at how America reacted when they didn't meddle in our election at all in 2016, but just the FBI and CIA pretended that they did. And they never had a single concrete shred of proof because it was a hoax the whole time. And yet, what did America do? We damn near went to war over that. Went to DEFCON 2 over it. And our entire political society, especially the liberal Democrats, had an absolute nervous breakdown over the idea that the Russians had overthrown the government of the United States of America and put their white supremacist Nazi sock puppet Donald Trump in power. I mean, they were terrified. Imagine for a moment if you had believed that, like sincerely really believed that. How terrifying that would be, that they were able to do that to us. And that's where, half the country was living there for years with, that idea in their head. of how dangerous these guys are. Only because Hillary needed an excuse why the emails portrayed her as the worst person on the planet Earth. So they needed to change the story to what the emails said, to where the emails came from. And then so they said, well, it was Russia gave them to WikiLeaks, which was obviously a hoax from the very, very beginning. But it worked for their purposes. I mean, it didn't stop him from being elected. But as the FBI told CNN, well, if we can't overthrow him, we can at least rein him in. And that was the purpose of the whole Russiagate investigation, was to prevent him from getting along with Russia. So if Trump had just taken this by the horns on Inauguration Day and said, I'm inviting Putin to D.C., we're going to sign a nuclear treaty, and the Washington Post can suck it if they don't like it. If he had done that, maybe, right? But anything short of that, he essentially was like helpless at Robert Mueller's feet, just getting stomped on for 2.5, 3 years, putting up with that, alleged giant fake hoax of a scandal hanging around his neck,
Yeah. This is a Scott Horton interview. We started with the Azov Battalion, and now we've come all the way back to the Russiagate stuff.
Yep. Why they hate Russia so much? They stand in the way, man.
Yeah. Well, and I have often thought the popular opinion. It's the popular opinion now. You have to hate Putin and you have to support Zelensky. I think a lot of that stems still. It's easy to sway people that way because of 2016. Because for years we were told, well, look, he gave you guys this orange man bad. And I think that enough of the population still is thinking in those terms. And he's still bad. I still hate the guy.
Yep.
And so
my buddy Mike Swanson said to me today that, in the minds of these liberal Democrats especially, that they just traded Trump for Putin. Now, he fills the same place in their imagination. In fact, you could just take the American local culture war and just take it globally. Putin is like Pat Buchanan, right? He's like this right wing. He's, Pat Buchanan declaring the culture war in 1992, where it's like all good Christians versus the secular left, or whatever. And they see Putin in that role. So he's in worse. I mean, at least Trump was a libertine, right? Trump wasn't really a conservative in any way. Putin is. Putin is a conservative, I don't know how intertwined with religious politics he gets, but he's identifiably orthodox and conservative and business oriented, and everything that, the secular left in America is absolutely at war against now. So it's just a great way for them to just project all their daddy issues or whatever onto this guy.
Yep. If you're looking for the world's best CBD products, look no further than PalomaVerdeCBD.com, a like-minded business out of San Antonio, Texas, owned by a great couple, Carlos and Vanessa. They love the show. They're supporting the show. They're giving you a discount when you buy these products because you like this show. We'll get there at the end here, but I've been ranting and raving about the sports cream for a long time. It is the best. I genuinely mean that. So if you're sore from workouts, go check out the CBD Menthol Sports Cream. If you're having trouble sleeping, they've got the Sleep Bundle CBD Pack. Maybe you've got pets like I do, like my 2 French bulldogs, Lux and George, that experience inflammation in some part of their spine or their back legs or whatever. Well, look no further. They've got the pet tinctures and the CBD dog chews over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Do you have anxiety at all? Well, there's CBD gummies over there. Are you stressed after a long day? There's CBD bath bombs over there. They've got this new CBD massage oil. Carlos, one of the owners of Paloma Verde, keeps asking me if he can use it on me. I've not allowed him to do so yet, but I suspect that their CBD massage oil is quite amazing. So go check that out. All things CBD related, you will find at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. And since they support this show and they want to help the listeners of this show get a discount, I've got a promo code for you. It's BUCK, B-U-C-K. Just enter that at checkout. You will get 20% off of your order. That is BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Tell them I sent you and enjoy the products. I know you will. Let's get back to the show. I'll get you out of here. I got to respect your time real quick. We're so many weeks into this involvement, the new form of it over there with Putin, quote unquote, invading Ukraine. Where are we with that, and where do you see it going in the next couple of months? Because the initial talking points were Russia didn't expect this. They're getting their ass kicked all over the place, and they're going to pull back any minute now. And I kept hearing these things, and that's slowly that isn't being said so much anymore. But where are we and where are we headed, do you think?
Yeah. I think that might be more true than it was before. It's really hard to say, but I had a really good interview with William Arkin today from Newsweek. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's kind of a mainstream level reporter, but it's really, you can tell, loyal only to his own perception of what is true and false and all that kind of thing. He's no sellout at all. He's written a lot of really great books, and he did the Top Secret America series for the Washington Post back at the end of the Bush years with Dana Priest there, exposing a lot of the Homeland Security state and the new national security state. Anyway, so he's got all these sources inside the Defense Intelligence Agency and all these other things. A lot of times you find journalists with kind of mid-ranking intelligence officer and type sources do a lot better than those getting the press releases from on high and talking to the spokesman and that kind of thing. So he's got a lot of sources like that. And he's saying that, it's true that the Russians are having a really bad time. And they did think that they were just going to roll right into Kiev, and they didn't. And they didn't coordinate their war very well. He talked about how, and I think we can reflect on our own history here, that there's probably something to this, that their Air Force is not separate from their army. It's subordinate to their army the way ours used to be. And so they're really only used kind of for close air support of infantry on the ground and all of that. But the army commanders don't really have an eye for the sky. So, I asked, why didn't the Russians do like both Bushes did in Iraq and soften them up with heavy air raids first and this kind of thing? He said, because they suck at their job. They don't know what they're doing, and they're, they're built up to fight war a certain way, and they're in a lot of trouble. And I think the Americans apparently have taken advantage of the fact of how dependent they are on their tanks. And they've just poured in for years. They have poured in these Javelin anti-tank missiles. So you go back to Syria, they were given the terrorists there these TOW missiles, TOW, which I forget what it stands for, but they're wire guided, shoulder fired or tripod fired anti-tank missiles. Well, the Javelins are better than that. They're, heat seeking or laser guided or whatever it is, but they're certainly a generation or two better than the kind of weapons that they were pouring into the Mujahideen there in Syria. And apparently they've been very effective against Russian tanks. Something that Arkin talked about was how the Russians have been very confined to the roads. They're not able to operate off-road very well. And so then they're, bogged down in heavy fighting inside cities where they're vulnerable, and their tanks and trucks and whatever, and just their tactics are not matching, or their strategy is not matching the situation very well. And he was saying they're very good at what the battalion level, but not higher. So like in any particular firefight, they do well. But what the hell are we doing and which way do we go now? They don't know what to do, that kind of thing. So he was saying they're having a lot of trouble in that, the common narrative that, because I asked him, I said, there's a counter narrative that says that whole big convoy that was rolling on Kiev, that was just a feint, that they were just trying to divide Ukrainian forces while they focused on the south and creating that so-called land bridge to Crimea and consolidating kind of the greater Donbass in the south first there. And he goes, nah. I mean, man, they devoted all these divisions. He goes, look at what we did in Iraq, where they just tore through the desert straight to Baghdad and blast anything in the way and all this. Right. The Russians invaded from 15 directions at once and didn't get very far in any case. You know what I mean? They just didn't do a damn good job of this. He said, you look at the far eastern Donbass region, they don't even control all of the Donbass right now. Much less all the territory, in the east of the country and this and that. So they've had, pretty bad tactics and strategy. And then the Ukrainians have had a hell of an advantage because not only they have American weapons, but they have American intelligence as well. So the Americans, that's Saddam Hussein. Your chemical weapons work a lot better when the Americans are helping you target the Iranians with them. So same kind of thing here, where the Americans are going, these coordinates, you know what I mean, that we got from our satellites, and just drop a bomb here, trust us, fire some artillery there, and it'll hit something, and helping them out in that way. So, but now then that means that it sucks, because what we want is ceasefire immediately, right? But instead, what we have is the Ukrainians feeling like, hey, they're not doing that bad. They've driven the Russians back in some ways. They forced the Russians to kind of, recalibrate their goals and what all they're trying to do at what times and this kind of thing. So they got a feeling like the momentum is with them. And they might be exaggerating how much momentum is with them, but, hopefully not. But then, the Russians, if they haven't even finished seizing all of the Donbass, well, they don't want to quit now. They got to at least be able to say they took the Donbass, So what we want, right, is for Putin to announce tonight that I won and I got what I came for and I punished the Ukrainian military bad enough and I declare victory and I'm going home now. Or we're keeping the Donbass, but you guys can have the rest, whatever, we're done. But how does he do that if he doesn't even have that? And how do we get and he's not going to settle for less than the Donbass. And how do we get Zelensky to say, and for that matter, the Nazis who stand to his right, armed to the teeth, how do we get them to accept giving up the Donbass when right now they control at least some of it? They're going to back out from territory that they're actually standing on. So in other words, the battlefield situation as it is virtually a stalemate and kind of in the worst way. That sort of would seem to discourage either side from wanting to negotiate and call a truce at this point. Some kind of ceasefire and armistice deal where they need to now. And the problem with that is that this could lead to nuclear war. And it was funny because I'm interviewing Arkin, but it was for my LA show, so I had to wrap it at a tight half an hour. So we're just ending at the part where our military is watching Russian nukes like a hawk right now, that they've got a couple of thousand of tactical strength nuclear weapons. Strategic meaning an H-bomb for killing your whole city with, and a tactical nuclear weapon being not a small nuke. I mean, the kind of nuke that you could kill Hiroshima or Nagasaki with, 10 or 15 kilotons. That's certainly a hell of a big A-bomb. But compared to a strategic nuke that could kill, say, all of Austin, Texas with just one bomb from Slaughter Lane to Breaker Lane, well, then that's, different, right? Anyway, the idea is that if the Russians are that frustrated, they might go ahead and break out nukes. And, their doctrine is if they feel like their state and its existence is threatened, that they might use nuclear weapons. Well, it's almost like the NSA tapping your phone 2 hops. It's like, all you have to do is go, well, if I lose the war, then I might get overthrown. So losing the war is the existential threat to the state, even though the war isn't inside Russia. The war is over there. But you know what I mean? It's just a twist. All you got to do is use a little Dick Cheney logic, and all of a sudden you can use nukes just to not lose. And then if Russia uses even a single A-bomb, dig a hole and crawl in it, bro, because I don't know what to tell you, man. At that point, I don't think that there are that many off-ramps from general nuclear war. Because everybody gets to, okay, we got to act real macho right now, because if they think we're weak, they're going to escalate even more. So we got to escalate to show them that they better not escalate. And then the other side escalates back, and they just escalate back. And there's only 3 or 4 different binders of different nuclear war plans on the shelf. And virtually all of them devolve into general nuclear war. I mean, imagine it came to the point where Russia nuked NATO headquarters in Brussels. Just one. Now what? Well, America's going to nuke Vladivostok, right? Or we're going to nuke Minsk in Belarus and say, now what? Right? They're not going to do nothing. They're going to start acting crazy. They say now the Russians have a policy called escalate to de-escalate. And that means they'll use one nuke in order to demonstrate that they mean business and we better back down. However, we won't let that strategy work. So we're letting them know right now that if they use a nuke to escalate to de-escalate, that screw you, pal, we will escalate back and we'll set off the nuke inside Russia. How do you like that? And that'll show you that, no, we're the ones who will escalate to de-escalate. Now you're the one who better de-escalate. Like, these guys are like your junior high school gym coach, meathead idiot, in charge of when we're going to start lobbing H-bombs back and forth. Right. And it's completely, I mean, I don't even know if that's fair to the gym coaches. It's maybe just the kids in your junior high school gym class. You know what I mean? Like, this is really stupid. But it's how they think about it. It's how they talk about it. It's how they practice their war games is based on this kind of idiocy. And then imagine like one more step. We lose a major city or they lose a major city. You know, they nuke Berlin or they nuke London or they nuke New York. And that's it. All 6,000 nukes on each side go flying at that point. And that's the end of the world. Over what? Over where's the line between the Donbass region in the Ukraine and Russia, where 99.999% of Americans never had any idea about any of this in the first place until just the other day. If you'd asked them on January 1st, they would have told you the Ukraine, I think, is a part of Russia, right? Isn't that a region in Russia, the Ukraine? And they would not have been able to show it to you on a map. And they sure as hell would not have been able to tell you where the border is supposed to be, whether the border of the Donbass region is here or whether it's 200 miles to the west. And our government is literally threatening to get us into a nuclear war over this. I mean, Biden is saying we're not going to fight. We're not going to Ukraine. We're not putting troops in. We're not putting planes in. We are not going to have World War III. And I believe that he means that when he says it. And I believe that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, is telling him, Mr. President, we don't fight the Russians. You know why? Because it's our responsibility to keep all of humanity from laying down dead, right? Like we can't do it. We just can't fight Russia, right, Mr. President? Fist bump. Boom. Good. People hate Milley. I don't really like him that much either, but I think he's solid on that. But look at all the pressure to escalate. You got Democratic senators saying it's time to send in ground troops. You got Republicans and Democrats saying we got to have a no-fly zone. We got to close the sky over Ukraine. You have anti-war activists holding rallies with big lobby money saying it's time for America to intervene in the war in Ukraine. You know, with pro-war rallies in the name of being anti-war. And you just have essentially relentless pressure. The pollsters ask the question, do you think Biden is doing enough to solve the problem of Ukraine? Don't you wish that he would do more? And you know what I mean? The question isn't like, do you support more diplomacy or do you support more weapon shipments? Choose out of those two. Because everyone would say more diplomacy, right? They don't ask more. That way. Yeah. So it's always just, you know, do you approve or disapprove of the way that Joe Biden is lying down on the job and not being violent enough? Well, I disapprove of that, say the poll results, you know? And it's just, the dynamic sucks, man, because, you know, the Democrats, look, they say only Nixon can go to China, right? Why? Because Nixon is one who will call you a commie if you go to China, right? You can't go to China. It has to be someone who has a reputation of attacking people from the right for being leftists to finally go and say, look, it ain't like I like Mao, but business is business and we got to do the right thing here. Me and David Rockefeller's man, Henry Kissinger, or Nelson Rockefeller's man, Henry Kissinger, agree that this is the right thing to do. So it's a right-wing capitalist thing or conservative capitalist thing to do. It's fine. And then, so that worked. But if a Democrat had done it, they'd have crucified him, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the dynamic. So it's the same thing here, where nobody can be soft on communism. Nobody can be soft on terrorism. Nobody can be soft on Putin, but especially not Democrats. And because the Republicans will never shut up about what wimps they are, what sissies they are, what pansies they are, how effeminate they are for, you know, a bunch of supposedly male leaders. And you hear this all the time, constantly. Turn on TV, on the cable TV news channels, and there's Republican congressmen and Republican senators saying we should be being tougher right now. This is all happening because of Biden's weakness and his fecklessness and his inability to stand up to Putin. Lindsey Graham says we should assassinate Vladimir Putin. And Kevin McCarthy says, if only we dump more arms in there sooner, this never would have happened. This kind of thing. Now, the Democrats they're just not tough enough to say, shut up, you. That isn't right. This is what's right. And we're just going to do what's right because I say so. And isn't that kind of an alpha monkey thing to do? They can't do that, right? It's the same thing with Obama, and the Republicans are the same way too. Donald Trump did the same thing on Afghanistan. Well, the generals are going to say that I'm a weak wimp if I don't curl up at their feet and obey their orders. So then that's what they do. And then they escalate the war and kill a few 100,000 people and accomplish nothing for it. in both cases, but especially with the Democrats, it's true. Hillary got beat by Obama because she was a hawk on Iraq. But then he hired her to be Secretary of State. And then the first thing she did was go and get us into a war in Libya for the express reason that she wanted to run on a successful war in Libya as a war president in the year 2016. She thought this would be a great, simple, quick little war. It'll be a splendid little war. And then she'll be able to get up there and say, see, look at how muscular and my smart foreign policy is. And of course, by 2016, nobody wanted to hear the word Libya whatsoever because it was an absolute catastrophe in the years since, with the tens of thousands drowned in the Mediterranean Sea and the reinstitution of chattel slavery and ISIS taking over the town of Sirte for a year and just complete, terror state on the ground. A couple of 10,000 people killed anyway, 20, 30,000 people killed in fighting in Libya and during that. So they don't want to talk about it anymore. But that was why she did it. Now, she had just gotten beat for being a hawk. But the lesson was not learned. The lesson was, I'm a Democrat and a woman, so I've got to be muscular. And that's it. And this is just, they call it calculus, but it's not. It's the most basic arithmetic, and it's stupid and wrong. But they just won't stop it. In fact, one more thing. Joe Cirincione, the nuke expert, was on my show and talked about this just a few weeks ago and said, well, for the Democrats, they got to be extra tough so nobody calls them weak. And I says to him, I go, dude, but that's weakness. And let me tell you something. And this is a guy, Joe, who's been a friend of the Democrats all these years, for 30 years. He knows he's on their side up there. A wonk, but with them. And I go, Joe, out here in the world, it's the only thing that's presumably better about the Democrats at all is that you're a little bit less worse on the wars. They're like, we're praying that you're really a wimp, that you're really scared, that you're really not Mr. Tough Guy who's going to go as far as the Republicans would go. That's what we like about you, man. We don't want a dragon lady in a pantsuit. We want a hippie girl in a sundress. That's who we'll actually support, right? Is somebody who doesn't believe in this militarism. But in Washington, D.C., that's not the logic. In D.C., the more of a Democrat you are, the more of a, Jane Fonda on the North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun you're presumed to be. So the more of a George W. Bush you got to act like. And that's just the only way they can think about it. And the America First Republicans, they just don't have their narrative together. And so they're being shouted down and kind of washed out by the hawks at the leaders of the Republican Party level.
The white pill in all of this, for me at least, because you turn on Hannity and Fox in the daytime, is exactly what you're saying, and CNN, of course, the same. But Tucker Carlson has been so great on intervention. And he's the by far number one rated show. And now I've been told in Tom Woods' email yesterday that he outranks, as far as Democrat viewers go, he has more than CNN and MSNBC. And then, of course, he's on Fox, so he's got the high number of Republicans.
Wow.
Luckily, it seems like he has the voice that most of us out here care to hear, because he is anti-war for the most part, as far as I can tell. Yep. And he's got Douglas McGregor on there quite a bit. And man, that's the white pill in all of this, because otherwise the noise is crazy. The pro-war stuff and do more. I can't stand that saying, wait, do more. It's like, you go do more. But yeah, it's at least we have, and one more rant that I have to go on. It's not the tough guy thing when the entire media and the military industrial complex is saying, hey, we should do more. We should go to war. It's not tough to go along with that. It's tough to be like Ron Paul and say, no, hold on. You guys are idiots. We shouldn't do this. Right. It takes balls to do that. And so I hope some of these people can realize that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And honestly, I think that's the point that we should drive home more and more and state explicitly. It's the kind of thing that maybe people know, but they need to hear somebody like you say it in English like that. That really does make more sense. Again, the case of Barack Obama on Afghanistan in 2009, the way they rolled him into that escalation, he did not want to do it. And I don't know how well you remember the pressure campaign of that year to force him, the Coindinistas, McChrystal and Petraeus and the war scientists. It wasn't like the Bush years. Now we got the brilliant geniuses. These guys read books and they're going to do the surge and it's going to be this brilliant thing. And they just pressured him. And Gates and Petraeus and McChrystal all threatened to resign if he would not do the surge. Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, was also saying, you better go along with the Pentagon on this, boss. She wasn't giving him any running room whatsoever on it. But the thing is, all he had to do was get up there and say, a year ago, I beat John McCain by 10 points because the American people wanted me to make these decisions, not him. And that's why, Senator McCain, you can lump it, pal. And Gates and Petraeus and McChrystal, you don't like it, you're fired.
Yep.
I won't even accept your resignations. You can beat it. And I'll hire military leaders who actually care about our enlisted men and aren't going to throw their lives away on a mission that they know as well as you know is never going to succeed. And that's because, again, Obama did know better. Here we are in the year 2022 after we already know we lost that war half a year ago. I'm telling you, we lost that war 10 years ago, and Obama knew it then. It was already lost before he escalated the damn thing. And, and I should have said 12 years ago, 13, 14. He knew. And anyway, he could have gone up there and said, no, I'm the alpha dog around here, and all you are going to curl up at my feet. Now who's the tough guy? I'm ordering the troops home. And so maybe ordering the troops home is a weak and wimpy thing to do, but beating up a 4-star general's pretty manly, isn't it? So how about that? You don't like it, Mr. Petraeus? Beat it. Go get a real job. Let's see if you can find one doing anything but consulting for military contractors. You bum. That's what I would have done. I would have ridiculed John McCain to death, into retirement. But Barack Obama wasn't man enough to do that. He was the coward that they were accusing him of being. So he curled up at their feet and he ordered the big escalation to look tough. And you got to give him credit though, Buck. It worked. His calculation was, this is going to shut up John McCain and Lindsey Graham. He had a deal with them. They promised to shut up if he gave it, another 30,000 troops. And the liberals weren't going to say anything. Because he was Barack Obama. And so, and they voted for him again. He was reelected. It didn't cost him to do it. It was only a benefit politically, but I think it would have been even better if he'd gone ahead and had that fight, And so, same thing here. I called my congressman. I got a Republican congressman. So what's he going to do? He's going to be a Russia hawk or he's going to be an America First guy. You can flip a coin for the guy. He doesn't know anything. He's just we got 400 and we got 200 and whatever random Joe Republican congressman out there for the most part. So I call him up and I go, look, Biden ain't weak. He's reckless. Putin's not a threat. We're making him one. And foreign interventionism is so George W. Bush, but we don't like that. We want America first. Read me?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's what they got to hear. That's what they got to hear. They got to know. They're like, oh. So if I go, no, America first, but I just say it like a real tough guy, then I can be for peace. Yeah. Right? Like, that's the game, Republicans. Get on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this has been good, Scott. But before we also get out of here, I want you to plug anything you'd like. But really quick, I assume you saw, is there any way you could do an impression of Kamala Harris's explanation of the Ukraine?
That was just the worst thing. I swear I thought it was fake. Like, come on. She was talking to some elementary school kids, and then you guys went and copied and pasted it or whatever. No, she really said, right, to this radio show in a major city in the morning. They're like, Ukraine is a small country in Europe. Russia is a big country that's near it. Russia invaded Ukraine. And the guys are like, huh? And the thing is, I'm just thinking the whole time she's stuttering through this. This is her briefing that she got this morning.
Yes.
This is what her people told to her. And she's doing her best to remember it and repeat it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I recognize that because I was an attempted foreign policy advisor to Gary Johnson. And I can imagine that happening in exactly the same way. Well, so there's this country, right? It's over there, like somewhere east of here. And then there's this other one. You've heard of them before. Russia, the big one, right? Yeah. This is how it would have come out, something a lot like that. So
Yeah. That was awesome. I just know that one's going to be clipped from this show and put on Twitter because it was at least entertaining. Scott, plug away anything you like. I know a lot of my listeners and viewers know your stuff, but for those who don't, please let them know.
Yeah, man. So we're at antiwar.com. That's the most important project on the internet there. I'm the editorial director there, but all credit goes to everybody else. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute. Got a lot of great libertarian writers and podcasters and everything going on there for you. And then I do a show, the Scott Horton Show, now including 5,700 interviews going back to this time 19 years ago, 2003, and the start of Iraq War II. And then I wrote these books. First of all, The Great Ron Paul is a collection of my transcripts of Ron Paul interviews. And then the two I wrote are Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And right now I'm working on a new one about the background to the conflict in Russia and Ukraine.
Excellent. I will link to those in the show notes page for this episode. Scott, thanks so much for being here on Counterflow.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you, Buck.
Yes, sir. You too. Well, there you go. We got through an uncomfortable topic and we got to jump all over the place and get into some fun discussions. I hope you appreciate the impression of Kamala Harris. Hope you guys enjoyed this week. And to support this show, please go over to patreon.com/counterflow. You're welcome to give as little as you'd like or as much as you'd like. I welcome it all, and it all goes right back into this show. Our website is counterflowpodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you guys soon. Take it easy.
You get split in fucking half, the icon, the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.